leaned back in my chair, watching Jamie's expression carefully as he placed the envelope on my desk. He was too calm. Too composed. It almost annoyed me. Where was the anger? The humiliation? He should have been fuming, maybe even begging me to reconsider. Instead, he just stood there, his dark eyes unreadable, his mouth set in that quiet, knowing way that made my stomach twist. I had planned for every reaction except this. Still, I didn't let my composure slip. Instead, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, letting my smile stretch a little wider. Come on, Jamie. No hard feelings, right? It's just business. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. Of course. No hard feelings. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The door shut behind him with a soft click, and for the first time all morning, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Jamie had been the last loose end. I knew he'd be upset when he found out about the promotion, but honestly, I thought he'd put up more of a fight. If anything, his calm reaction made me uneasy. But it didn't matter now. He was out, Steve was in, and I had secured the life I wanted. I picked up the envelope, flipping it between my fingers. It felt heavier than a simple resignation letter should have. A trickle of unease crawled up my spine, but I shook it off. Jamie was a planner, methodical, predictable. He wasn't the type to do anything dramatic. I peeled it open, unfolding the neatly typed letter inside. It wasn't just a resignation letter. It was a bomb. My breath hitched as my eyes scanned the words, each line carving through my confidence like a blade. He knew. Not just about Steve. About everything. The affair, the money, the cover-ups, the under-the-table deal Steve and I had pulled off to climb the corporate ladder. He had evidence, emails, transactions, even a recorded conversation between Steve and me that I had no idea existed. And worst of all, he had already sent it out. To the board. To legal. To HR. To everyone. My blood turned to ice. I gripped the edge of my desk, my vision blurring as I reread the final line of his letter, his parting words like a dagger through my carefully constructed world. No hard feelings. A cold sweat prickled at the back of my neck as I stared at the letter, the words blurring together. My mind scrambled for a way out, an explanation, a loophole, but there wasn't one. Jamie had sealed my fate with the same patience and precision he'd always prided himself on. This wasn't an impulsive act of revenge. This was a meticulously planned execution. I shoved back from my desk, standing too quickly. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, the sound making Steve glance up from his desk across the office. "Everything okay, babe?" he asked, pushing back his blonde hair, his usual cocky smirk in place. No, everything was not okay. But I couldn't let him see that. Not yet. I forced a smile, folding the letter neatly and slipping it back into the envelope like it was just another document. Yeah. Just some unexpected news from Jamie. Steve chuckled, stretching his arms behind his head. Man, I thought he was gonna lose his mind when you told him. But the guy barely even reacted. Think he saw it coming? I swallowed the lump in my throat, glancing around the office to make sure no one was eavesdropping. He knew, I said quietly. About us. About everything. Steve's smirk faltered. What do you mean everything? I hesitated, then tossed the envelope onto his desk. Read it. As Steve's eyes darted across the page, I watched his face go from amused to pale in a matter of seconds. When he finished, he looked up at me, his mouth opening slightly like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. For once, Steve had nothing to say. Did he really send this to the board? He finally croaked. I nodded, sinking into the chair across from him. Steve ran a hand down his face. *T, Melissa. I winced. I hated when he used my full name, it made everything feel too real. We need to do damage control, I said quickly. If we get ahead of this. Steve shook his head. There's no getting ahead of this. If Jamie sent this out, we're done. I refused to accept that. No, I snapped, gripping the armrests of my chair. There's always a way out. We just have to be smart. Steve let out a dry laugh. Smart? Babe, the guy just checkmated us. You really think we can spin this? I did. I had to. Because I had spent too many years clawing my way up in this company, sacrificing everything to get here. I wasn't about to lose it all to Jamie. Steve sighed, rubbing his temples. All right. What's the plan? I exhaled slowly, forcing my thoughts to settle. First, we find out exactly who received those emails. If we can control the narrative, we might be able to contain this. Steve nodded, but his face was still tight with worry. I grabbed my phone and pulled up my contacts, scrolling until I found the name I was looking for. Nathan Turner, head of HR. Nathan and I had always had a friendly relationship. If anyone could slow down whatever Jamie had put in motion, it was him. I tapped the call button and brought the phone to my ear, forcing my voice into something smooth and confident. Nate, hey. I need a favor. I could hear the hesitation in his voice before he even spoke. Melissa. I think we need to talk. My stomach clenched. This was already spiraling faster than I had anticipated. And for the first time in years, I felt something I never allowed myself to feel. Fear. I gripped my phone tighter, my knuckles turning white as I forced my voice to remain steady. Nate, I said carefully, ignoring the pounding in my chest. Whatever Jamie sent you, I can explain. We should meet. A long pause. Then a sigh. Melissa, I don't think you understand how bad this looks. I clenched my jaw. Of course I understood. Jamie had made sure of that. Just give me a chance to talk to you in person, I pressed, glancing at Steve, who was now pacing beside me, running his hands through his hair. One meeting. That's all I'm asking. Another pause. Fine. Relief flooded my body, but it was short-lived. But I can't promise anything. The board's already seen the emails. There's talk of an emergency meeting. Damn it. Jamie hadn't just exposed me, he had set a ticking clock. Just meet me in an hour, I said firmly, not giving him a chance to back out. My office. Nate hesitated, then exhaled sharply. All right. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto my desk, my mind racing. Steve stared at me, his arms crossed. This isn't gonna work. I narrowed my eyes. Excuse me. You can try to spin this, but Jamie didn't just hit us with gossip. He dropped evidence in their laps. You saw the email. He has financial records, bank transfers, hell, he has a recording of us talking about rigging that promotion process. I inhaled sharply, pushing away the creeping panic. I'm not going down like this, I hissed. I didn't claw my way to the top just to be ruined by my ex-husband. Steve scoffed. Not yet, anyway. I turned on him, my temper flaring. Not yet? What the hell does that mean? He held up his hands in mock surrender. Relax. I'm just saying we're both in deep, but if this blows up, you have a lot more to lose than I do. I stared at him. The words stung, not just because they were true, but because Steve was already thinking about saving himself. That was the moment I realized something. If I wanted to survive this, I might have to cut him loose first. I turned back to my desk, schooling my expression into something controlled. I'm handling this, I said coldly. Stay out of my way. Steve watched me for a long second, then shrugged. Whatever you say, boss. I didn't like the way he said it. But I didn't have time to deal with him now. I took a deep breath, grabbed my laptop, and started digging. If Jamie had evidence, I needed to know how deep it went, and if there was anything I could use against him in return. After all, he had blindsided me. Now it was my turn. I didn't waste time. If Jamie had been playing the long game, I needed to know how long. I opened my laptop, fingers flying across the keys as I searched for anything I could use against him. Jamie wasn't a saint. He had worked at this company for years. There had to be something. A misstep, a mistake, an oversight I could twist into my favor. Steve hovered near the desk, arms crossed. And what exactly are you looking for? I ignored him, scrolling through past project reports, expense accounts, email logs. If Jamie wanted to burn me, I'd drag him into the fire with me. But the more I searched, the more a sickening realization sank in. There was nothing. Jamie had played it clean. No shady deals. No falsified reports. No underhanded moves. I felt a chill creep up my spine. This wasn't just revenge, this was calculated. Jamie had spent months, maybe even years, preparing for this moment. He must have seen this coming before I even realized I was heading towards self-destruction. And now I was scrambling while he sat back, watching it all unfold. A sharp knock at the door made me flinch. Nate! I closed the laptop, smoothing my expression before walking over and opening the door. Nathan Turner stood there, his face tense. Melissa, he said in a clipped tone, stepping inside and shutting the door behind him. I don't have long. The board is already reviewing everything. I gestured toward the chair in front of my desk, my stomach twisting. Then we need to talk now. Nate sat, his fingers drumming against his knee. Look, I don't know what the hell happened between you and Jamie, but this is bad. Really bad. The emails alone show direct evidence of fraud, Melissa. That's enough to not only fire you, it's enough for criminal charges. A sharp spike of fear lanced through me, but I shoved it down. I need time, I said. Time to fix this, to explain. Time? Nate let out a humorless laugh. Melissa, you don't have time. They're voting on your termination this afternoon. And if legal gets involved? You and Steve are finished. I swallowed hard, forcing a confident smile. Then help me. Delay the vote. I've always had your back, Nate. I need you to have mine now. Nate hesitated, his jaw tightening. I pressed forward. You owe me. His eyes flickered with something guilt, doubt, but before he could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and cursed under his breath. The board's calling an emergency session. Now! Panic squeezed my chest. This was happening faster than I had expected. Nate, I started, but he shook his head. I can't help you, Melissa. He stood, his expression hard. Not this time. The finality in his voice sent a rush of cold through my veins. He turned toward the door, hesitated for just a moment, then left. Silence filled the office. Steve exhaled loudly. Well, that's that. I turned to him, my pulse pounding. No, I said, voice steel. It's not over. Because if Jamie wanted to ruin me, I'd make damn sure I took him down with me. I stood frozen, my breath coming too fast as the weight of Nate's words pressed down on me. They were voting now. Everything was unraveling so much faster than I expected. Steve leaned against my desk, arms crossed, watching me carefully. You know, if we leave right now, we might be able to grab a drink before we both lose our jobs. I snapped my head toward him, fury flashing in my chest. Are you enjoying this? He smirked, but I could see the tension in his jaw. No, Melissa, I'm not enjoying this. But I'm not an idiot either. We're done. Jamie made sure of that. We have nothing to fight back with. I shook my head. That's not true. There's always something. Steve let out a dry laugh. Like what? Magic? A secret file that erases every shady thing we did? Jamie played us. He was 3 steps ahead while we were too busy sneaking around and thinking we were untouchable. I swallowed hard. I hated how right he sounded. But I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts. If Nate wouldn't help me, I needed another angle. And I found it. Bradley Caldwell, senior partner, Caldwell and Reed Law Firm. I hit call. Steve raised an eyebrow. Calling a lawyer already? Damn. Quick acceptance of defeat. I shot him a glare. Bradley isn't just a lawyer. He's a fixer. If there's a way to slow this down, he'll find it. The line rang twice before his deep, composed voice answered. Melissa. This is unexpected. I forced my voice to stay steady. Bradley, I need your help. Urgently. A pause. I'm listening. I quickly explained the situation, giving him the facts without sounding panicked. I needed him to hear strength in my voice, not desperation. Another pause. Then this is bad. No kidding. I'll be honest with you, he continued. Stopping the vote is impossible. But delaying the consequences, that might be doable. I clutched the phone tighter. How? I need to know, do you have any leverage against the board? A lawsuit? A discrimination angle? A contract clause they overlooked? My mind raced. Did I? No, wait. I did. There's a clause, I said quickly, adrenaline surging. In my contract. A non-compete only applies if I'm fired for cause. If they can't legally prove fraud, they can't enforce it. Bradley hummed in approval. That's good. If you're terminated without cause, you can still walk away with a severance package. But you'll need to argue that Jamie's evidence isn't strong enough. I exhaled sharply. Can you do that? I'll do what I can. But Melissa. His tone darkened. You need to prepare for the worst. I already knew that. I hung up and turned to Steve. We're fighting this. He let out a slow breath. All right, boss. You take the lead. But if the ship goes down, he gave me a pointed look. I'm not sinking with you. I paced my office, my heels clicking against the floor as my mind raced through the possibilities. The walls were closing in, but I wasn't going to let Jamie have the last move. I still had a shot at salvaging something. Steve watched me from the desk, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. So what now, Melissa? You think your lawyer's gonna magically make this disappear? No, I said sharply. But he can make it messy enough that the board hesitates before firing me outright. Steve snorted. Messy? Babe, this isn't just office politics. Jamie didn't just screw with your career, he set fire to both of us. The company's not going to hesitate. They're going to cut us loose and make an example out of us. I ignored him, my fingers tightening around my phone as I pulled up my emails. If I could just stall the vote, by myself even one more day, I could find a way to spin this. Then my inbox refreshed. A new message. Subject. Urgent board decision and immediate action required. I didn't even need to open it. I already knew what it was. The vote was done. The decision was made. A heavy silence filled the room as I sat down, forcing myself to read it. Melissa, the board has concluded its emergency review of the provided materials. Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave pending final termination proceedings. Your access to company systems has been revoked. Security will escort you out by the end of the hour. HR will follow up regarding severance negotiations. Please do not attempt to contact employees during this transition. My breath came short and fast. My hands clenched into fists around the phone. Steve peered over my shoulder and let out a low whistle. Well, that's that. I shot up from my chair, my heart hammering. No, I growled. This isn't over. Steve ran a hand down his face. Melissa, it is. We're done here. I whirled on him, my mind spinning too fast to slow down. No, you're done if you want to roll over and take this. I still have cards to play. Steve exhaled, shaking his head. Jesus, you're really gonna fight this to the bitter end, huh? I ignored him. I grabbed my laptop, or at least I tried to. A message popped up on the screen. Access denied. Account disabled. My stomach dropped. They had already locked me out of the system. Panic clawed at my chest. They weren't just firing me. They were erasing me. I felt the walls press in tighter, suffocating me. I couldn't lose everything. I wouldn't. I grabbed my phone again and scrolled through my contacts. If I couldn't stop this, I could at least make sure Jamie paid for it too. There was one name I had been holding back. A last resort. But now? Now I had nothing left to lose. I found the contact and hit call. The line rang once. Twice. Then a voice answered. Melissa? Didn't expect to hear from you. I took a breath, steadying myself. I have something for you. And I think you're going to want to hear it. If I was going down, I was dragging Jamie with me. I took a steadying breath, gripping my phone tightly as the voice on the other end waited for me to speak. Melissa? The voice repeated, curiosity laced with suspicion. I forced a smirk, trying to inject confidence into my voice. Hello, Robert. I think we should talk. Robert Caldwell, senior partner at Caldwell and Reed, but more importantly, Jamie's new boss. The man Jamie had always admired, always wanted to impress. And the man who, if given the right information, could ruin Jamie just as easily as Jamie had ruined me. A pause. Then a slow exhale. You're calling me out of the blue. That usually means trouble. I leaned against my desk, letting the chaos in my mind slow for just a moment. Not for you, I said smoothly. For Jamie. Another pause. Then go on. I glanced at Steve, who was watching me carefully, arms crossed, a flicker of something between amusement and apprehension in his expression. I ignored him and pushed forward. You recently brought Jamie on board at Caldwell and Reed, I began. I assume you did your due diligence before hiring him? Of course. I hummed in mock approval. Good. Then tell me, did you happen to look into his financial history before making him part of your team? Robert didn't respond immediately, but I knew I had his attention. Melissa, he said slowly, what are you implying? I turned, bracing my hand on the desk. I'm saying Jamie isn't as clean as you think. He played the long game to take me down, but he conveniently left out his own skeletons. I'm willing to bet he didn't disclose some of his less creative accounting decisions during his time at our company. That was a gamble. A huge gamble. Because truthfully, I had no solid evidence on Jamie yet. But I knew the way he operated. He was meticulous, yes, but no one played the corporate game perfectly. If I could plant enough doubt in Robert's mind, he'd start digging. And when people like Robert dug, they found things. Robert let out a low chuckle. Melissa, you do realize how desperate this sounds, don't you? I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Desperate people don't have leverage, Robert. And I do. Steve raised an eyebrow at me. I kept my gaze forward, unflinching. Robert sighed. If you have something concrete, send it to me. Clicked my tongue. Now, Robert. I wouldn't just give you something for free. I need a trade. And what exactly do you want? I turned and met Steve's eyes. Then I laid down my terms. I want Jamie off the playing field. If you find something, I want him out permanently. No severance, no soft landing. Just like he did to me. A A silence stretched between us, thick with consideration. Then finally, if what you're saying checks out, I'll handle it. Asterisk. I smiled, the first real victory I'd felt all day. Pleasure doing business with you, Robert. I ended the call and turned to Steve. He let out a low whistle. Damn. Remind me never to cross you. I picked up my coat, my heart still pounding. Jamie started this. I'm just making sure he doesn't get to enjoy his win for long. Because if Jamie thought he had beaten me, he was about to learn that I never lost for long. I set my phone down, my pulse still hammering in my ears. That call with Robert had been a gamble, but I knew men like him. If there was even a hint of something worth uncovering, he'd dig until he found it. And Jamie? He wasn't perfect. He'd been too focused on destroying me to think about the dirt I could find on him. Steve leaned against my desk, arms crossed. So what now? You gonna sit back and hope Jamie's got skeletons in his closet? Or are we actually doing something about it? I shot him a sharp look. We. He smirked. Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm not going down with you. But I'm also not against watching this train wreck unfold from a safe distance. I exhaled sharply and grabbed my laptop, opening my personal files. If I wanted to push this further, I needed my own ammunition. Jamie had been meticulous, but I knew him. He wasn't the type to sit still, not even after leaving the company. I clicked through his last few project approvals, looking for anything that might have been rushed or altered in a way that could bite him later. Then finally, I found it. A small discrepancy in one of his signed contracts. I leaned in closer, scanning the fine print. The date, the signatures, the timing. And suddenly I knew exactly where to go next. Steve, I said slowly, my fingers drumming on the desk. He arched an eyebrow. Yeah. I turned to him, my mind racing. I need to take a little trip. And you're coming with me. His smirk faltered slightly. Oh, am I? I grabbed my coat and phone, already heading for the door. Unless you'd rather sit here and wait for security to drag us both out. Steve groaned. I hate that I find you entertaining. I shot him a grin over my shoulder. Then you're going to love what's coming next. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to an unassuming office building on the west side of the city. The kind of place no one paid much attention to. The kind of place where quiet deals happened. Steve frowned as he killed the engine. Remind me again why we're here? I unbuckled my seatbelt, my eyes scanning the building's tinted windows. Jamie signed off on a major contract here just before he left. It was pushed through unusually fast. I want to know why. Steve let out a low whistle. You really think he screwed up? I smiled. I think Jamie was so focused on taking me down that he might have left himself exposed. Steve chuckled as we stepped out of the car. God, you two are made for each other. I shot him a glare. Shut up and follow my lead. We walked into the building, the air-conditioned lobby far too sterile, far too perfect. A receptionist glanced up, her expression neutral. Can I help you? I smiled, placing my hands on the counter. Yes. I have an appointment with Mr. Holloway. Steve stiffened beside me. He knew I didn't have an appointment. But the receptionist hesitated for only a second before nodding. He's in his office. Down the hall, second door to the right. I gave her a charming smile. Thank you. As we walked down the hall, Steve leaned in. You're insane. I smirked. You're just figuring that out? We reached the door, and I knocked lightly before pushing it open. Inside, Richard Holloway, a mid-level executive who had quietly signed off on one of Jamie's biggest deals, looked up in surprise. Melissa. His brows furrowed. What are you doing here? I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. Richard, I think you and I need to have a very important conversation. His face paled slightly, because whatever Jamie had done here, Richard knew about it. Richard Holloway's face went pale the moment he saw me. Good. That meant he had something to hide. He straightened in his chair, his fingers twitching as he pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Melissa, I wasn't expecting you. I gave him a polite smile, stepping fully into his office. No, I imagine you weren't. Steve shut the door behind us, leaning against it with that lazy, amused smirk he always wore when he knew things were about to get interesting. Richard glanced between us, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. Look, if this is about I cut him off, keeping my voice smooth. Jamie's contract. His mouth snapped shut. Bullseye. I took my time, walking toward the chair across from his desk before sitting down and crossing my legs. You signed off on one of the biggest deals of Jamie's career, just before he left the company. The kind of deal that usually takes months of negotiation. I tilted my head. Yet somehow he got it through in weeks. Richard forced a tight smile. Jamie was very efficient. I let out a small laugh. Oh, Richard. Let's not do this dance. His fingers tapped nervously on the desk. Melissa, I don't know what you're getting at, but... I leaned in. You and I both know Jamie had help. Silence. Richard looked away, his jaw clenching. I pressed further. Did he pressure you? Was there an incentive involved? I let the question hang, watching the beads of sweat forming at his temple. Because here's the thing, Richard, Jamie torched me on his way out. I have nothing left to lose. But you? You still have a nice cushy job. A reputation. I gestured around his office. A comfortable life. Richard's lips thinned. Melissa. You have one chance to get ahead of this, I continued. Because the moment Robert Caldwell starts digging into Jamie's past this deal, it's going to be front and center. I smiled. And when it blows up, do you really think Jamie is going to take the fall alone? Panic flickered in his eyes. Got him. Steve let out a low whistle. Man, I almost feel bad for the guy. Richard glared at him, but his fingers were gripping the armrest of his chair now. He was cracking. I leaned back, waiting. Then finally he exhaled sharply and dropped his head into his hands. Damn it, he muttered. I didn't say anything. I just waited. And then, just like that, the dam broke. He forced it through, Richard admitted, his voice strained. He needed that deal finalized before he left. He called in favors, twisted arms, hell, he even had someone from legal rewrite clauses to make it less risky on his end. Bingo. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was buzzing. Who from legal? I asked, already knowing that was the next thread I'd pull. Richard hesitated but then sighed. Mark Langley. Mark. That snake. He had always been one of Jamie's quiet allies, the kind who played both sides but never left any evidence behind. If Jamie had used him to alter a contract, there was definitely something there. Steve let out a low chuckle. Damn, Jamie. Thought he was so perfect, huh? Richard rubbed his temples. Look, I didn't want to be involved. But Jamie made it clear that if I didn't push the deal through, he'd find someone else who would. I had no choice. I smiled. Of course you didn't. Richard exhaled. So what happens now? I stood, smoothing out my blouse. Now? I go have a chat with Mark Langley. And this time? I was bringing receipts. Richard Holloway sat slumped in his chair, running a hand down his face as though he'd aged 10 years in the last 5 minutes. He had finally cracked, but I wasn't done yet. I had another target in mind. Mark Langley, Jamie's quiet accomplice. The legal expert who knew how to bend rules just enough to make things look clean while keeping the real dirt buried. If Jamie had roped him into this, there was something to uncover, and I was going to find it. I turned to Steve, who was still leaning against the door with that same smug look he always wore when things started getting interesting. Come on, I said, grabbing my coat. We're paying Mark a visit. Steve's smirk widened. Oh, I like where this is going. Richard let out a groan. Melissa, please just leave this alone. I already told you everything I know. I turned back, giving him a pleasant smile. Oh, Richard. You're still under the impression that you had a choice in all this. I tilted my head. You're a loose end now. I suggest you figure out how you're going to distance yourself before this all goes public. His face paled again, and I didn't wait for his response. I turned on my heel and walked out, Steve following close behind. As soon as we stepped into the elevator, he let out a low chuckle. You terrify people, you know that? I glanced at him. You say that like it's a bad thing. Steve grinned. Not at all. I respect the hell out of it. I rolled my eyes as the elevator dinged. Let's go. Mark Langley's office was in a different building, sleek, modern, the kind of place that screamed power moves happen here. It didn't take long to find him. His assistant barely looked up as we walked past, and before he could even think about kicking us out, I pushed open the door to his office. Mark was sitting behind his desk, going over paperwork, and he definitely wasn't expecting me. His eyes flickered with surprise, but just as quickly, his expression smoothed into something neutral. Melissa, he said, leaning back in his chair. To what do I owe the pleasure? Steve shut the door behind us, locking it. Mark's eyebrows twitched at the sound, but he didn't comment. I sat down across from him, placing my phone on the desk between us. Let's skip the pleasantries, Mark. You and I both know Jamie left a mess behind. I'm here to clean it up. He chuckled, shaking his head. And what makes you think I know anything about that? I smiled. Richard Holloway. The amusement flickered from his eyes for just a second. Barely noticeable, but I caught it. I leaned forward. He told me everything. How Jamie pushed the contract through. How you reworked the legal terms to protect him. My voice turned sharper. I want to know why. Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. You're making a lot of assumptions, Melissa. Steve snorted. She's good at that. But here's the thing. Her assumptions are usually right. Mark exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Look, I did what I was told. Jamie needed the contract adjusted, and he wanted it done fast. He glanced between us. I don't ask questions. I just make things happen. I studied him for a moment. He wasn't lying. But he wasn't telling me everything either. I drummed my fingers on the desk. So Jamie wanted it done fast? I echoed. Why? Mark hesitated. Then finally. Because he needed the payout before he left. I felt a rush of adrenaline spike through me. That was it. Jamie hadn't just been setting me up. He'd been setting up a golden parachute for himself. I sat back, nodding slowly. And I'm guessing the timing of that payout was just a coincidence? Mark's silence was answer enough. I smirked. That's what I thought. Steve let out a low whistle. Damn, Jamie. Greedy and vindictive. Mark sighed, rubbing his temples again. Melissa, I don't know what you're planning, but... Oh, I know exactly what I'm planning. I cut in smoothly, standing up. You helped Jamie rig a contract to secure his payout before he left, and I bet there's enough there to get that entire deal reevaluated. Mark's face tightened. Melissa. Which means, I continued, Jamie's nice, comfortable new job at Caldwell and Reed is suddenly in jeopardy. Mark exhaled sharply. You don't have proof. I smiled, picking up my phone. Not yet. But I will. Then I turned to Steve. Come on, I said, heading for the door. We've got work to do. Because Jamie thought he had one. But I was about to rip everything away from him. I stepped out of Mark Langley's office, my mind already racing through my next move. I had him rattled. That was a good start. But I needed proof. Solid, irrefutable proof that Jamie had manipulated that deal for his own gain. And I knew exactly where to get it. Steve fell into step beside me as we walked down the corridor, his hands stuffed in his pockets. So what's next? You gonna break into Jamie's house and steal his financial records? I smirked. Tempting. But no. Steve chuckled. Damn. Would have been fun. I shot him a look. We don't need to break in. Jamie isn't as careful as he thinks he is. Steve frowned. What do you mean? I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts. Jamie's biggest weakness is that he always assumed he was the smartest person in the room. And because of that, he trusted people he shouldn't have. I found the number I was looking for and hit call. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Melissa. A slow smile spread across my lips. Hello, Karen. Karen Monroe, Jamie's former assistant. The one person who had been closest to him in his final months at the company. The one person who had access to everything. Karen hesitated. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I leaned against the wall, keeping my voice smooth. I figured it was time for a chat. You have a minute. Another pause. Melissa. I don't know if I should be talking to you. Steve arched an eyebrow at me, mouthing careful. I ignored him. Come on, Karen. You and I both know Jamie wasn't as clean as he made himself out to be. A sharp inhale. Got her. I just need one thing, Karen. I pressed. One document. One email. Something that ties Jamie to that rushed contract. She hesitated. Melissa. I softened my tone. I know he screwed you over too. Silence. I waited. Then finally she let out a shaky breath. Check your inbox in 10 minutes. A thrill shot through me. You're a lifesaver, Karen. Just don't mention my name. Of course not. I hung up and turned to Steve, grinning. We've got him. Steve let out a low whistle. You really are terrifying. I smirked. And Jamie's about to find out exactly how much. 10 minutes later. An email notification popped up on my phone. Subject: Requested documents. I opened it, my heart pounding. And there it was. An email thread between Jamie and Mark Langley, discussing the contract revisions. Jamie had explicitly pushed for an early payout, ensuring he received his bonus before leaving the company. I scrolled further. A final attachment. A signed document confirming that Jamie had requested an amendment to the contract terms. One that wasn't disclosed in the original board review. My stomach flipped. This was it. The proof I needed. I looked up at Steve, grinning. Jamie's done. Steve peered over my shoulder, letting out a low laugh. Damn. You think Caldwell and Reed will still want him after this? I smirked. Let's find out. I forwarded the email to Robert Caldwell. Then I sat back and waited. Because Jamie had spent months setting me up for failure. Now it was his turn to watch everything he built crumble. The email was sent. Now all I had to do was wait. Steve and I sat in my car outside the office building, the tension thick between us. He drummed his fingers on the dashboard, watching me with barely concealed amusement. You really think Caldwell's gonna take the bait? He asked. I smirked. He doesn't have a choice. Jamie had built his entire career on appearing untouchable. But men like Robert Caldwell didn't tolerate liabilities. And Jamie had just become the biggest one on their payroll. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. New email, Robert Caldwell. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Melissa. This is interesting. I'll be handling this matter personally. I assume you prefer to remain anonymous in this? I grinned. Looks like the walls are closing in on Jamie, I said, turning the phone toward Steve. He let out a low whistle. Damn. So what now? You gonna sit back and watch him burn? I thought about that for a second. Then I shook my head. No, I said, unlocking my phone. I want front row seats. Jamie's downfall began faster than I expected. By the next morning, rumors were already circulating. Caldwell and Reed had launched an internal review into Jamie's hiring process. Quiet whispers about financial irregularities were spreading. And then the real kicker. Jamie was removed from the company's online directory. It wasn't an official firing yet, but it was close. I sipped my coffee, savoring the moment. Steve sat across from me at the cafe, scrolling through his phone. So, how long before Jamie figures out you were behind this? I smirked. Oh, he already knows. As if on cue, my phone rang. Jamie's name flashed across the screen. Steve chuckled. Speak of the devil. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice light. Jamie. It's been a while. Silence. Then. You bitch. I bit back a laugh. Oh, Jamie. That's no way to talk to your ex-wife. His breathing was heavy, controlled. He was furious. You set me up, he hissed. I knew you'd try something, but this? This was low even for you. I leaned back in my chair, completely unbothered. Set you up? Jamie, you were the one who rigged the contract. You were the one who made sure you got paid before screwing me over. I smiled. I just made sure the right people found out. You think this is over? Jamie growled. Oh, it's definitely over, I said sweetly. You just don't know it yet. A sharp intake of breath. I could feel his rage through the phone. Then he spoke, his voice low and deadly. You have no idea what you've just done, Melissa. I arched an eyebrow. Oh, I think I do. And then I hung up. Steve let out a low whistle. Phew. You really love poking the bear, don't you? I took another sip of coffee. Jamie started this. I set my cup down, meeting Steve's gaze. Now I'm just making sure he loses. Jamie was unraveling. And I was loving every second of it. By midday, news had leaked that Caldwell and Reed had suspended him indefinitely. The company hadn't officially fired him yet, but I knew how this worked. They were gathering evidence, preparing to make their decision airtight. Jamie wouldn't just lose his job, he'd lose his reputation. I sat back in my chair, scrolling through my phone as the whisper spread. Online forums, corporate gossip boards, even a few LinkedIn posts from anonymous sources. Jamie had always prided himself on being untouchable. Now, he was the scandal. Steve leaned against my desk, arms crossed. So what's the next move? I looked up at him, tapping a finger against my chin. Jamie still has one lifeline left. Steve frowned. Who? I smirked. His new fiancée. Steve let out a low whistle. Damn. You really want to ruin his entire life, huh? I tilted my head. Why stop at his career when I can destroy everything? Because Jamie hadn't just betrayed me professionally. He'd spent years pretending to be the perfect husband while screwing me over behind my back. He had lied to me. He had manipulated me. And now I was making sure he had nothing left. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I wanted. Catherine Aldrich. Jamie's picture-perfect fiancée. The woman he cheated on me with. The woman who had sat across from me at corporate events, smiling sweetly while she stabbed me in the back. I hit call. Steve raised an eyebrow. You really think she's gonna pick up? I didn't answer. The line rang once. Twice. Then. Melissa? Oh, this was going to be fun. Catherine's voice was cautious, but not hostile. Not yet. I smiled, letting my voice turn light. Catherine. It's been a while. A pause. Why are you calling me? I exhaled, letting just enough concern seep into my voice. I figured someone should warn you. Silence. Then she let out a quiet, nervous laugh. Warn me. I tilted my head. Jamie's in a lot of trouble. Catherine hesitated. I know about the job situation. He told me everything. I let out a small, sympathetic hum. Oh, sweetie. Did he really? She didn't respond. I pressed on. Did he tell you why Caldwell and Reed really suspended him? Silence. I smiled. Did he mention that he rigged his last deal at our company? That he illegally altered financial contracts to make sure he got a payout before leaving? I let the word sink in. Because Catherine? He's not just losing his job. If Caldwell and Reed decides to report him, he could be facing criminal charges. A sharp inhale. Now she was listening. I leaned back in my chair, twirling a pen between my fingers. I thought you deserved to know, considering. I let my voice trail off. Catherine swallowed hard. Considering what? I smirked. Well, he did propose to you, didn't he? Silence. I knew that silence. It was the sound of a woman realizing she was engaged to a fraud. Then her voice wavered. Why are you telling me this? I let out a small laugh. Because, Catherine, if you really think Jamie won't throw you under the bus to save himself, you don't know him at all. She was breathing fast now. You're lying. I softened my tone. I sent proof to Caldwell and Reed. They believed me. Catherine didn't respond. I knew what was happening. She was breaking. Doubt was sinking in, twisting inside her. She was picturing Jamie's carefully crafted lies, replaying every conversation, every reassurance. And she was realizing. Jamie wasn't just a cheater. He was a liability. A disaster. And Catherine? She was next in line to be destroyed. I gave her a moment, then sighed dramatically. I just thought you should know before you make a huge mistake. And then I hung up. Steve let out a low chuckle. Damn. You really don't hold back. I grinned. Why would I? Because Jamie wasn't just losing his career. Now he was about to lose the only person still standing by his side. Catherine was breaking. I could hear it in her voice, feel it in the silence that stretched between us before I hung up. And now? I just had to wait. Steve leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me with a mix of amusement and mild concern. So what's next? You sit back and wait for Jamie to implode. I smirked. Oh, Steve. He's already imploding. Because Jamie's career was gone. His reputation was in freefall. And now his personal life was about to be ripped apart too. I checked my phone, waiting for the inevitable. And then. A ding. New message, Catherine Aldrich. I smiled as I opened it. Melissa, we need to talk. Now. Bingo. 20 minutes later, I sat across from Catherine in a high-end cafe, watching her try to hold herself together. She looked wrecked. Her makeup was flawless, her designer coat perfectly draped over her shoulders, but her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her coffee cup. Good. That meant she was finally seeing the truth. She took a breath, her green eyes locking onto mine. Tell me everything. I tilted my head, pretending to hesitate. You mean Jamie didn't? Her jaw tightened. He told me it was a misunderstanding. I let out a small, amused hum. Of course he did. She exhaled sharply. But then I checked his emails. Her voice wavered. And I found things. Oh, this was even better than I expected. Catherine swallowed hard, staring at the table. He kept saying he had to leave the company before everything fell apart. That he'd planned his exit carefully. Her voice dropped. But I didn't realize he was. She shook her head. God. How did I not see it? I leaned forward, my voice gentle but firm. Because Jamie is good at lying. He makes you feel like you're the only one who matters. Like you're different. I let the word sink in. But the truth is? You were never different. Her breath hitched. There it was. That moment when everything clicked, when Catherine realized she was just another chess piece in Jamie's little game. And I was about to shove the board off the table. I pulled out my phone, tapping a few buttons before sliding it across the table toward her. She frowned. What's this? I smiled. A copy of everything I sent to Caldwell and Reed. Emails, financial records, the contract Jamie altered. It's all there. She hesitated before picking it up, scrolling through the files. As she read, her lips parted slightly in shock. Then her expression hardened. Good. Let the anger settle in. Because Jamie had betrayed me. He had used me. He had ripped apart my life to build his own perfect little future. And now? That future was burning. Catherine exhaled shakily, setting the phone down. So what do you want from me? I tilted my head, feigning innocence. Oh, Catherine. I don't want anything. I leaned in, lowering my voice. But if I were you, I'd make sure Jamie never gets a happy ending. A flicker of something dangerous crossed her face. And just like that, I knew she was in. Catherine stared at me, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. I could see it happening, the shift. The moment she stopped seeing Jamie as the man she loved and started seeing him for what he really was. A liar. A fraud. A man who had used her just like he had used me. And now? She wanted revenge. Good. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs. So, Catherine, what are you going to do? She swallowed hard, setting the phone down between us. I need time to think. I smirked. No, you don't. Her eyes snapped to mine, startled. I tilted my head. You already know what you're going to do. You just want someone to say it out loud. Silence. Then her voice came out soft. He proposed to me last month. I hummed in mock sympathy. And now you know the real reason why. Jamie hadn't asked Catherine to marry him because he loved her. He had done it to secure his future. He thought she was his safety net, the woman who would stand by him no matter what. But now? Now I had given her the truth. And Jamie? He was alone. Catherine let out a shaky breath. He always told me you were vindictive, she whispered. I grinned. He wasn't wrong. She exhaled sharply, pressing her fingers to her temple. God, I don't even know who he is anymore. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Then maybe it's time to introduce him to the new you. She didn't respond right away. But I saw it, the flicker of something dangerous in her eyes. Jamie had underestimated me. Now he had underestimated her too. And that was going to be his final mistake. 3 days later it happened. Caldwell and Reed officially terminated Jamie. Not quietly. Not behind closed doors. No, this was public. His firing was splashed across industry news. His financial manipulation was exposed. His reputation was shattered. And then Catherine finished the job. She didn't just break up with him. She humiliated him. Publicly. Loudly. Jamie came home one evening to find his belongings on the sidewalk. Catherine had changed the locks. Canceled their wedding venue. Told all their friends the truth. And the best part? She filmed it. A short, brutal clip of Jamie standing outside in disbelief, his suitcase at his feet. Catherine's voice rang out. Clear, sharp, full of fury. You ruined your career. You lied to everyone. And you thought you could use me to rebuild your life? Guess what, Jamie? You have nothing now. The video went viral. I watched it with a glass of wine in my hand, the taste of victory sweet on my tongue. Jamie was done. His name was mud. And for the first time in months I felt free. Steve sat across from me, watching with amusement. Damn. You really left him with nothing, huh? I smiled. I warned him. Steve shook his head, chuckling. Remind me never to piss you off. I leaned back, savoring the moment. Jamie had spent years thinking he was untouchable. That he was smarter. That he could manipulate me, throw me aside and build a new life without consequences. But in the end, I didn't just beat him. I destroyed him. Game over, Jamie. I win. The end.